Good afternoon, class of 2016, masters, deans, colleagues, and friends. My name is Marichelle Gentry, and I'm a Senior Associate Dean of Yale College and Dean of Student Affairs. On behalf of all my colleagues in Yale College, I'd like to welcome you to Yale and to this orientation keynote address. At this time, I ask that you disable all cell phones and electronic devices. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce Mary Miller, the Dean of Yale College and Sterling Professor of History of Art. Before taking on the deanship, Dean Miller served as Master of Saybrook College from 1999 until she became Dean of Yale College in 2008. Dean Miller also has served as the chair of the History of Art Department. Dean Miller received her degrees from Princeton and Yale universities, and for 30 years she's been a leader in the study of the ancient world, receiving both a Guggenheim Fellowship and membership into the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. As you now know, Dean Miller is an internationally recognized expert on Mayan art and architecture, having published 6 major books and is under contract for her 7th book with the University of Texas Press. Dean Miller recently presented the 59th A.W. Mellon Lectures in the Fine Arts Series at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. Dean Miller also will deliver the Slade Lectures at Cambridge University in 2014 and 2015. The 2 lecture series are considered the most prestigious in the field of art history. Dean Miller will now come to introduce our keynote speaker.
Well, it's so nice to see you all again and so soon. I saw so many of you this afternoon at the academic fair when I have to say most of you were in shorts and t-shirts. So let me now suggest that you, if you have say a jacket on that you can shed, I want to encourage you to remove it because it is hot in here. And I just want to draw your attention to the upper story, the clear story of windows here, which open only twice a year, once for the freshman address, and if necessary, for baccalaureate, and for no other occasions, not even this one. So that's why we're going to be particularly hot in here this afternoon. But not so bad, and particularly now that men have taken off their suit jackets if they felt like it, I hope everyone's a little more comfortable. It's my pleasure this afternoon to introduce to you Charles Bailyn, the A. Bartlett Giamatti Professor of Astronomy and Physics at Yale University. And I suspect that bearing that title means something in particular to Charles Bailyn, who was here during the presidency of Bart Giamatti when he graduated from Yale in 1981. He earned his PhD from Harvard 6 years later and joined the Yale faculty shortly thereafter. And he's now been at Yale teaching astronomy and physics 22 years just this year. For years, he taught gateways, different kinds of gateway courses to astronomy to Yale undergraduates, particularly courses that excited non-scientists right alongside students with scientific aspirations, using his own exciting research in black holes as the springboard. But his desire for new frontiers led him out of his, what I would say, the bread and butter courses of his department, when in 2008, he and an associate professor of religious studies taught for the first time a course they would teach at least one time after that, religion and the Big Bang. The idea that an astronomer and a religious studies professor would come together to ask the critical questions about where we come from and where we are going. For his incredible contribution in the classroom, Professor Bailyn has earned the Dylan Hickson Prize, the highest teaching award in the natural sciences. So I don't think I really need to tell you to listen up, but I will anyhow, because I think we're in for a stimulating afternoon. Professor Bailyn.
Thank you, Dean Miller. Thank you, Dean Gentry. And thanks to all of you for the opportunity to talk to you on what is, after all, the very last day of your life that you haven't yet taken a Yale class. So it turns out that the universe is made of bubbles. This discovery was made when I was a student. Someone carried out a large survey of the positions of galaxies throughout the universe and showed that the galaxies are not distributed randomly. Rather, there are great voids containing almost no galaxies, surrounded by giant walls filled with galaxies, just like a big tub full of soap bubbles, with the voids in the middle of the individual bubbles and the walls at the sides. The media made a big deal out of this. Lots of headlines about how God is forever blowing bubbles, things of this nature. In terms of its overall structure, the university is perhaps not so different from the universe. And in fact, people often refer to the so-called Yale Bubble. What they mean by this is that there are walls between the inside of Yale and everything else on the outside. Some of these walls are physical. The residential colleges are, after all, gated communities, and only those with certain privileges can enter. Human nature is such that people often very much desire to be let into places that are restricted, regardless of what's actually inside, but even more so if the inside is perceived to be a good thing. In the case of Yale, as you're all acutely aware, it's quite hard to be allowed in. And as you're perhaps beginning to discover, once you're in, it's a pretty nice place to be. As an aside, I should tell you, most faculty members do not, in fact, have key cards that open the residential colleges. This causes some bitterness, since the faculty are under the mistaken impression that they are important people around here. So don't be alarmed if you see a scruffy middle-aged person hanging around the gates of your residential college. Don't send for the cops. It's probably just a slightly irritated faculty member waiting for some more privileged individual to let him or her into the true inner sanctums of Yale, which are, of course, the places occupied by the undergraduates. But the Yale bubble doesn't refer only to physical barriers. These gates are manifestations of much deeper psychological boundaries. There's a huge amount going on at Yale that is available only to those inside. We have classes, entertainments, meals, debates and arguments of all kinds, distinguished visitors, high-level networking opportunities, formal and informal social events, and every sort of extracurricular activity, both licit and illicit. Occasionally, you might even get a chance to rest and think. It makes the rest of the world seem dull and faded. There's just so much to do here. And you get to do it with such interesting people. People just like you, except maybe a little bit smarter and better looking. Gotta keep at it, faster and faster. You might miss something. And of course, you will miss things, but that is, as the computer scientists like to say, a feature, not a bug. The whole point is that there's something for everyone here and then some. A whole universe of activities, far greater than any one person can take in. I use the word universe here not as a metaphor, but in its technical sense. Technically, the universe comprises everything that can ever possibly be seen or can possibly exert any other sort of influence on any observer situated within it. And it's tempting to think that the university has the same features, that activities taking place outside the walls of the Yale bubble really don't influence what goes on inside. But this is a mistake. Just because Yale has too much going on for one person to absorb doesn't mean that the outside world has ceased to exist. Sometimes the influence is all too obvious. 11 years ago this fall, the Twin Towers fell during one of the most popular time slots for Yale classes. Students and faculty emerged from their classrooms to find the whole place in an uproar. It was like coming out of a dark theater into bright afternoon sunlight. I remember it was hard to figure out how to respond. Did one just keep giving classes? Stop all regular activities? It was certainly hard to focus on formal teaching and learning for a little while. Or was it our obligation to keep the bubble intact, to keep doing our thing in the face of adversity and danger? Different people responded differently. And while I certainly hope that no such dramatic event mars your stay here at Yale, it's worth keeping in mind that our internal activities might be disrupted at any moment by events from the outside. And it can be sometimes awkward to deal with the outside world. Ooh, you go to Yale. You must be so smart. Please. You know, sometimes one even goes so far as to deny being a Yalie at all. Have you guys done this yet? Oh, I'm at a small college in Connecticut. You've probably never heard of it. It's called Ezra Stiles. We all do it eventually. It just gets too embarrassing to acknowledge the privilege it is to be here to those who, for whatever reason, don't have the opportunity. And maybe we should be a bit embarrassed. There are, of course, many others who deserve to be here as much as we do. But whether deserved or not, this embarrassment makes it easier to hang out with people who share the privilege of being here. It's nice not to constantly have to justify one's existence. And it's nice not to have to explain all the in-group vocabulary that we use so freely with each other. But there's a real danger created by succumbing to this temptation and staying inside the bubble. Namely, it gives the things we do here an unnatural, heightened importance. And that, in turn, makes us attribute dire existential consequences to things that are really not, in a cosmic sense, big deals. That test, that tryout, that insulting remark, maybe it doesn't matter quite as much as you think. So now let me give you all a piece of practical advice. About 7 weeks from now, you will be going completely insane. It will be the middle of midterm exams, and you will have discovered, if you haven't already, that all the other students are both smarter and harder working than you are. Now, of course, they think the same about you, but that doesn't help very much. The roommate you like best will be in the midst of some terrible personal crisis that requires your constant support. The roommate you like least will have adopted some personal habit even more annoying than what you've had to put up with so far. You will have just had your worst game, rehearsal, meeting, whatever it is. The partner of your dreams will have turned you down. The whole universe will seem to be against you. But it's not the universe that is turned on you. You're just trapped in the Yale bubble. So here's one way to get out. Go down to Trumbull Street, over there, a block down the road, turn right. Cross Whitney Avenue, by which action you leave Yale behind. Walk another block or two to where the access to the highway is and turn left on Orange Street. And then just keep on walking. After a mile or two, you'll get to a place called East Rock Park. It's quite a large park. There's a lake, a hill, paths all around. And as you wander around, it will occur to you, this is October in New England, one of the most spectacularly beautiful natural scenes on our entire planet. You will be reminded that there are people who are not between the ages of 18 and 22. There are mothers with babies, middle-aged joggers, old married couples, some 12-year-old kid practicing free throws. And you'll recall that the universe also contains non-human animals. Pet dogs are overrepresented at East Rock, but there are also deer, swans, fish, frogs, turtles, songbirds of all types. Walk around for an hour or so and then head back. Your problems will not be gone. In fact, by losing an hour of study time, they might have gotten a little bit worse. But you may find that you have a better perspective on their importance. East Rock is, of course, not the only way to escape the Yale bubble. If you want to see particularly far into the rest of the universe, I recommend the Leitner Observatory's Tuesday night open houses up on Science Hill. Or you could go to New York, or you could call your grandmother, or you could read something that is not assigned for a class, or go out into the community and campaign for your favorite political party or social cause, or just shut the door, close your eyes, and let your mind run free. There are more and better ways to relieve stress than yet another late-night party with other Yaleys who are worried about the exact same things that you are. Focusing on the inside of the bubble ratchets up the intensity and anxiety. It's not a stress reducer at all. But the bubble walls that separate Yale from the rest of the universe are not the only boundaries you will encounter. There are bubbles within the Yale bubble, just as the universe has what the cosmologists call hierarchical structure. Out there in the universe, galaxies form into galaxy clusters, clusters form superclusters, the clusters and the superclusters form the edges of the bubbles, and there's recent evidence that the bubbles themselves are grouped together. And once again, the university is similar to the universe. Yale is not one undifferentiated experience. There's a wide range of substructure. Academic departments, sports teams, cultural organizations, performing arts groups, secret and not-so-secret societies, residential colleges, all sorts of smaller bubbles inside the Yale bubble. Any given student inhabits just a few of these bubbles. It's why everyone's experience of Yale is different. My own experience of Yale involved a rather bizarre mixture of singing groups and astrophysics courses. These two bubbles were pretty separate from one another, although they did touch on a couple of occasions. In my sophomore year, I was the pitch pipe of the Dukes men. Thank you. Those were the days when I was an important person around here. And we were invited to sing at the physics department Christmas party. We needed the money, so I took the gig. But I have to say, I found it hard to perform our usual antics in front of people who were going to grade my exams the very next day. People and events look different when viewed through different bubbles. The iridescent refraction that occurs when the edges of the bubbles collide provides an interesting point of view. This effect occurs strongly when faculty and students interact in unusual places, in the supermarket or the bank or something like that. I vividly remember my first year back as a faculty member. I'd been away from Yale for a few years, and coming back I found my habits reverting to those of my 20-year-old self. I was crossing the campus late one night, perhaps 11 o'clock p.m., and I got thirsty and wanted a soda. So just as I would have done a decade earlier, I went into the library. We called it CCL back then, but now it's been renovated into the Bass Library. And there used to be a bunch of vending machines down there that we called Machine City. So I trotted down to Machine City and bought myself a Coke. On the way, I passed a group of students studying, and they looked at me with absolute horror. And I kind of turned around to see what demon was following me. And then I realized these students were in my class, and I was giving a midterm exam the very next day. And they thought I was checking up on them. So I scurried away so that they could get on with it, pretending that I hadn't noticed them there. Another one of those awkward moments when bubbles collide. And I realized that my students were now treating me just as I had treated the physics faculty during the Dukesmen's performance, not as fellow human beings, but as some kind of alternative life form. It really shouldn't be so awkward. One of the things that makes Yale great is the personal interaction that's possible here between faculty and students. But it takes some real out-of-the-bubble behavior on both sides to realize that promise. It took me a while to get the hang of it, both as a student and later as a faculty member. But when that connection gets made, it can be really quite wonderful. So let me encourage you. If you see a faculty member in an unexpected situation, don't freak out. We're probably not checking up on your study habits. We just want a soda, just like you, and a friendly gesture might be appreciated. I did know one other person who inhabited both the astrophysics and the singing group bubble, a young woman so spectacularly beautiful that I couldn't speak coherently in her presence until our 25th reunion. I then found out that she's really a very nice person, and that if I hadn't been so terrified, we might have been friends. After all, we did have a lot of common interests. It was a real missed opportunity. I missed many opportunities as a student, and so will you. As I said before, no one can possibly do all the things that are to be done around here. But let me describe two other mistakes I made in the hope that it might help you avoid a particular kind of blunder. Then as now, Yale had some truly spectacular classes that no one should miss. These are generally referred to by the name of the grand gurus who teach them. In my day, we had Spence, which was a famous course on Chinese history, and Scully, an even more famous course on art history. Both Professor Spence and Professor Scully are now retired, but I don't doubt that you already know their contemporary equivalents. I had a strangely negative attitude toward these courses, based, I now think, on a kind of adolescent arrogance. I refused to take any of them, on the grounds that 600 Yale students couldn't all be right. The consequence of this, though, is that I now know much less than I might about Chinese history and the history of art, both of which would in fact provide very useful background for some of my current activities. A second missed opportunity occurred in graduate school, not here at Yale, and relates back to those cosmic bubbles I mentioned at the beginning. The discovery of cosmic bubbles proved to be a major advance in astrophysics. Detailed studies of hierarchical structure provide some of the best constraints on the origin and evolution of the universe that we have. I could have made that discovery, but I didn't. One of the options I had when choosing my PhD thesis topic was to work on galaxy maps, just the thing that led to the discovery of cosmic structure. But this seemed to me an amazingly boring project. The plan was to observe 20,000 galaxies and plot them on a map. Take a spectrum, find the redshift, calculate the distance, put it on the map. Lather, rinse, repeat. 20,000 times. What a bore. So I did something else instead, but one of my classmates, clearer thinking and more patient than I, took on the project, wrote a clever piece of software to do all the work, and the paper she wrote has been cited more often than my top 4 papers combined. Looking back, I think these anecdotes reveal the same flaw. In both cases, I was convinced that I knew what I was doing, so much so that I refused to try anything outside of what had become my comfort zone, my bubble. But that bubble was really quite small, and so I missed out. Fortunately, I got over my silly antipathy toward big popular courses by my senior year and almost accidentally took the Intro to Film Studies course. This was about as far from my comfort zone as possible, a big lecture course on visual art, and here I have to apologize to Dean Miller, a distinguished art historian, and confess that this is an area in which I have neither talent nor great interest. Nevertheless, taking that course was perhaps the single best thing I did at Yale. Knowing little about visual images, I had imagined that the point of going to the movies was to find out how the plot turned out, that the content of the film was more or less contained within the words of the script. But it turned out, greatly to my surprise, that whole realms of meaning are contained within the images themselves. Who knew? I didn't. But after taking that course, I began to have an inkling of an area of human experience that I otherwise would have completely missed out. And this has enriched every single one of the embarrassingly large numbers of hours that I've since spent watching TV. So in retrospect, that course enhanced my life more than any other academic experience I've ever had. Similarly, the missed opportunity to work on galaxy maps indicated a narrow view of what interesting academic work might consist of. This is a flaw I'm currently trying to push back against. I've become involved in Yale's collaboration with the National University of Singapore to create a new liberal arts college on the other side of the world. Trying to bridge the cultural, political, and intellectual gaps between New Haven and Singapore is an entirely new kind of challenge for me. It's a really interesting and exciting project. It's also been intensely controversial. Some people think that the nature of the Singapore bubble is such that we shouldn't be attempting to work with them at all. It's just the kind of debate that one hopes for at a place like Yale and that we hope will occur in the new college in Singapore as well. One of the things that's recently happened in this project is we've hired the first batch of faculty for this endeavor. They're a fascinating group. Many will be on campus here during the coming year, and I hope that a few of you will get to know them. The people attracted to this kind of thing tend to be what the demographers call multi-state migrants, people who grew up in one place and culture and shifted repeatedly to other places and cultures. In other words, bubble busters. I too am an interstate migrant, but in my case the states involved are Massachusetts and Connecticut. And somehow going from Yale to Harvard and back doesn't really seem all that imaginative. So I'm very grateful that in middle age I will finally be able to do something that you all can do in the next few years, namely study abroad. It's a particularly fine way to escape from the Yale bubble and its various sub-bubbles. You know, I don't remember much from freshman week as such, in part due to activities better left undiscussed in the presence of deans, but one incident has stuck with me. I remember going to a meal with two new friends, the kinds of friends that you met 15 minutes ago and have become close buddies, some of whom I should tell you one doesn't see again until the day before commencement. One of us noticed someone sitting alone in the dining hall and insisted that as a friendly gesture we should join him. To our embarrassment, he turned out not to be a freshman, but an upperclassman, a junior, I think, quite jaded about Yale and about life. He smiled wistfully at our youthful enthusiasm and just shook his head. "Ah, youth," he said, looking back at us from the advanced age of 20. And so my final piece of advice today is this: don't be that guy. Hold fiercely to the sense of excitement and adventure and anxiety that you now have at Yale and for the rest of your life. Keep having meals with people you've never met. Keep taking courses on things you know nothing about. Keep trying activities you've never done before. And when you graduate, don't imagine for 1 minute that the course of your life is somehow set in stone. Don't mistake the interior of one particular bubble for the whole of our wide-ranging, varied, and fascinating university, much less for the universe itself. And with that, let me thank you for your attention and welcome to Yale.
Thank you, Professor Bailyn, for your thoughtful and wise words. And now, as part of this gathering, we'd like to introduce you to a long-standing Yale tradition, the singing of our alma mater, Bright College Years. You will sing it many times in your lives as students and then as alumni, so it is fitting that you begin your Yale career by singing it together for the very first time as a class. The words and tune may be unfamiliar right now, but you soon will learn them by heart. Some representatives of the Yale Glee Club are here today to lead us. They will sing the first verse, and then I ask that you rise and sing both verses. You've been given a Yale handkerchief, and it is our custom to wave it from your right to left, okay, on the last line. Now let me now call on Yale Glee Club President and Morris College resident of the class of 2013, Mr. Eli Mitchell Larson and the Yale Glee Club, who will be accompanied on the organ by Mr. Simon Jacobs.